Hi, it's Beverly Cole. Welcome back. Today we're going to make a card for all of those survivors we know. We're using the Marble Magic paper pack and layering it with some digitals from the Southwest Garden digital stamp set. These are both available in my Etsy shop called TheArtsystamperShop, all one word. Now I cut out my background to be 4 by 5 1/4. I just had to cut a little bit off because I printed it pretty much the size I wanted. I always give myself a little wiggle room though, just in case I measured wrong. And here I am fussy cutting the hat, which I propped on top of the cactus, and the animal skull that I also used a PNG and layered over the cactus. What I'm going to do is ink the edges of this with some Distress Oxide Walnut stain I decided to use. And I like to use my images upside down so that I can get the edges without being too fussy. And then I flip them over just to make sure that I got every bit of the edges. I don't like any white showing. Okay. Now by putting them on the image where I want them, I just layer them right over those images. And on the video they look white, but they really aren't. It's just the color. They are actually the same color as the fussy cut images. Now I just use some dimensionals, cut them to fit, to attach my hat. It's much easier to put it on the card than on the back of the fussy cut piece. It's so tiny. This way I can be able to just place it on top of the other one there. Now before I do the skull, I want to work on the sentiment. So I cut the sentiment pretty much to size of the banners that I'm using here on this die by Tim Holtz. I believe it's called Tattered Banners. I use pencil marks because I can see through the paper if I hold it up to the light. So I want to make sure that my sentiment, is where I want it to be. Just takes a few seconds to make some little lines, and then I line it up over that banner image, tape it in place with some washi tape that I've used a few times. I try to get as much use out of my tape as possible. And then I run it through my die cut machine, and there I have my banner. I love these banners. They're just so cool, and I think it really goes well with this image combination here. You know, everything looks kind of worn out. You know, in the desert, everything is going to get hit by sand, and look at that skull. It's been worn away. So my little sentiment is worn away as well. And of course, I use the same ink to ink all the edges and make it look old. And then I noticed there's a little piece that didn't quite make it out of the die cut. So I'm using my little sharp tool here and removing it and inking well. And then I just use some glue to put it in place where I want it. I slid it, I didn't slide it, I put it so that when I attach the skull here, a little bit of the skull is overlapping that banner. Gives it a little bit more dimension. Now, like I've said before, these backgrounds in this Marble Magic set were actually made by acrylic pours that I did. Okay, so now, well, you know, I'm never really satisfied with something just the way it is. So while I'm cutting this background piece to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, I decide, well, you know, I need a little bit more distress around the edges. And you know how I love my vignette. So I go around the corners and decide, yeah, I really want to put more ink on than that. So using my inking tool, I'm just going around. Now, you know, the Distress Oxides are a little more opaque than the regular Distress inks. So now, I remembered a card I made once where I thought I used some gold on the sentiment, and I thought, you know, gold really looks cool with these kind of images. So I decided to get some gold ink and ink up the edges, and I'm going to use some embossing powder from Sparkle and Sprinkle. I ended up using gold detail, but any gold would work, or any color you prefer. Even copper would look cool. I'm looking at this and thinking, yeah, copper would have been cool. And I forgot to use my anti-static bag, so I'm kind of sneaking it in there, although I don't know if I even needed to do this, but it made me feel better. So then I'm just sticking all the edges with that Brilliance ink around. You don't need to use gold ink, but I was going real gold, and I don't even know if that is gold. I think it might be copper, but anyway, it's juicy, so I wanted to use it. And now I heat set this. And while it's hot, I'm able to stick it into the embossing powder and get a little more on the corners. When it's hot, it just automatically will stick to the hot areas. The powder will. Then I decide, well, you know, I'm going to do the same thing to the edges of my background, my frame, and have a double gold frame. So I did remember to use my powder anti-static pillow this time. You can see the powder all over that black cardstock. And again, doing the same exact thing. Pretty easy to do. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be uneven. That just makes it look more interesting with these images that are kind of time-worn desert images. And now that's how it will look when it's layered. Pretty cool. So I use dimensionals to attach my image to my frame. Easy peasy. And the digital images just make this so easy. It's like putting a puzzle together, but you can get creative at the same time. So you can see how the hat and the skull popping off the card. But of course I'm not done. So now I've decided I'm going to add some vintage drops by Nuvo, and I'm using 3 different colors. I'll list them below. I can't remember exactly which ones I used, but I'm again adding triangles, and these are very tiny dots I'm using, trying to just be very tiny and subtle. Now this turquoise one, and when I got to the 3rd color, I think it was a little thicker than the others. It had maybe, I don't know, shook it up, or if I had stored it upside down, I don't know, but it was giving me a little problem. So I just, some of the drops had little tails on them, but I was able to fix it with a small pin. I actually used a T-pin to fix the purple drops that I do here. I'm adding them, and they started to, they were just a little bit too thick, and they weren't making perfectly nice little dots. So I used a pin to remove the tails, and it was just the easiest thing. I just kind of lifted it off, and it came right off with the pin. So no problem at all. And then I did need to put this card aside and let these little drops dry. And then I layered this on a card, and that was it. Pretty much easy peasy 5-minute card. And here it is. Thanks for stopping by, and I will see you in the next video. Be sure to hit the bell so you don't miss a thing. Bye.